I'm very glad to be here with you at the Institute of Cultural Diplomacy. We are the Institute of Cultural Diplomacy. We are the advocates, the proponents of cultural diplomacy. And this is what I'm going to say a few words about. Culture, in particular political culture, under the heading, The Force of Ideas, Examples to be Learned from. The world is undergoing profound changes in our times, and it is changing very fast. I should probably rephrase this and say the world is being changed very profoundly and very fast, because there are always doers. Let's never forget that. There are always doers. 2 years ago, I met with the late Esa Musa, the lawyer, the High Court judge from South Africa, a close associate of Nelson Mandela. And he said, and this is memorable, that the biggest obstacle to change was indeed an idea. The idea that the system couldn't be changed. And he said that this proved to be the highest threshold to step over before they could abolish the apartheid system. And he said that in his neighborhood they had created a slogan which said, "Freedom in our lifetime." Freedom in our lifetime. And nobody believed in this, because people thought the system could not be changed. But once people started to believe that the slogan could be materialized, that it could become reality, then things started to change. And the system started to crumble. Because this idea, which was now in the hearts not only of the black part of the population, but also of the white part of the population. Everybody now had increasing doubts about the sustainability of the apartheid system. And once this had been planted in the people's hearts, things started to change. Now, politics, what is politics? As I see it, politics is about the way society thinks, where it wants to go, which values it holds, and in turn, these values and this will, this general will in society, decides what the politicians and the big stakeholders, whether in economy or the world of politics, can do. And if I turn to Iceland, my home country, which in many ways is characteristic of what happens elsewhere, because changes in political culture, they tend to spread everywhere. It's like fashion. My generation remembers the pointed shoes for men, very pointed, very uncomfortable. And then after the pointed shoes came thick soles. And even those who were 2 meters high and desperately wanted to look a little smaller, shorter, they had to buy these thick-soled shoes, because this was only on sale in the shops. And so it has been with politics. The political ideas on offer tend to be the same. And in the last 20 years or so, the political ideas on offer are market-oriented. They've pushed social solutions to the side. This is what has happened in Iceland, and I believe many other countries. And a barometer I can use to measure this is my father. My father and I. he was a conservative. He was director of education in Reykjavik, but he was also a conservative, a right-wing man in politics. I stand to the left. He was not an extremist or extreme man of extreme views, but he was right-wing. Many would say I was rather extreme to the left, although I, of course, regard myself as a moderate man. But the important thing is this. My father, the right-winger, speaking in the 1960s, 50s, 60s, early 70s, and I, speaking these years, in our time, were saying basically the same things. We were saying basically the same things. He, of course, was open for market solutions to a greater degree than I am, but he would never have allowed marketization, privatization of our healthcare system, of our elementary schools, of our social system. What has happened? The political pendulum has been swung to the right. This does not mean that right-wing political parties became bigger or stronger. No, all parties started to think this way. They were all looking for market-oriented solutions instead of the social solutions society had, well, more or less agreed on before that time. Now, but how did this go along? How did this happen, and why? Of course, the answer here is very complex. It has to do with the world of interests I referred to earlier, of power politics. The Soviet bloc had crumbled, was morally bankrupt. Nobody believed in the idea anymore of this form of organizing, this way of organizing society. And when people don't believe in anything or something longer, things will eventually change. But they were doers. They were doers. As Mark said, I was a television journalist in the 1980s. And we had them all on visit, and I made programs with them. Milton Friedman, Buchanan, Friedrich Hayek, they came all along like priests, preaching the new culture, the new ideas of neoliberalism. And they knew how to do it, to plow the earth, to prepare for the new crop. And then eventually, we had the crop on our tables. I don't like the diet at all, but it is there. Partly due to this propaganda for years. Now, if we turn to the present day and reflect back to 1945, when 250,000 people were killed by a nuclear bomb in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. We believed for a long time that this would never happen again. And hopefully it doesn't happen again, of course. The idea of the nuclear bomb, indeed, is that it should never be used, that it serve as a deterrent to war. But we know there are warheads, there are nuclear weapons, and now there are on the scenes people who are actually talking about using it. They are actually talking about using it. So this is something that is worrying the world, rightfully, in our days, and the world is beginning to react. Only a few days ago, the ICANN organization, the International Campaign Against Nuclear Arms received the Nobel Prize in Oslo. They have been working on a nuclear ban for many years, but in July this year, 122 nations had signed the treaty. And in the United Nations, there are 193 member states, so that leaves out 71, 29 of the NATO states, and of course all those powers which possess nuclear weapons. So people say, what is this all about? What does this change? Because it is, of course, about these nations which actually, or states which actually possess nuclear weapons. But as Judy Williams said, she is an American peace activist and co-founder of another organization, ICBL, which stands for International Campaign on Ban of Landmines, which is based on a coalition that was formed in 1992. She said, well, the pessimists, they were saying this to us as well when we started our work. And the International Campaign on the Ban on Landmines now has 163 signatories. That only leaves 34 states of the United Nations out. But already this campaign has changed a lot. And so has another convention, which is in the making, Convention on Cluster Munitions, CCM, an international treaty that prohibits the use and transfer and stockpiling of cluster bombs, a type of explosive weapons that scatters sub-munitions over an area. Now this convention was started, or the work for it was started in 2008 and has already been ratified by 30 states. It was originally in 2008 when it was started in Dublin, it was signed by 30 states, but now there are 108 states which have signed the treaty. Now, what is the importance of all this? Let me come back to that. It has morally and politically, it's important. It provides a platform for all of us to discuss these matters in our home countries. To take an example, to follow the implementation of the International Campaign on Ban with Landmines, the so-called Ottawa Convention, there are organizations within 100 states which follow this on a daily basis. What's happening? Who is producing? Who is not adhering to the rules? And from the moral to the economic, there is a small step. Because already these organizations are pressurizing companies which are producing these bombs. And although, for instance, the United States does not adhere to the cluster bomb treaty, the ban on cluster bombs, I am told no such weapons are now produced in the United States. Why? Due to this moral, political, economic pressure. So these campaigns, these words, these ideas are changing the world. Now, in 2014, I heard Ralph Nader speak in Berkeley in California. He was then 80 years old and as much alive as ever. He impressed many of us when he started his campaigns for consumer protection. In the 60s, in 1965, he wrote this famous book, Unsafe at Any Speed. And he changed for a while, then it wore off. He changed for a while the culture of consumer protection in the United States. He did that. He said in this lecture, in the United States of America, there are 3 million bird watchers. 3 million bird watchers. Why don't we have 3 million social watchers who follow what the politicians are doing to counter the pressure groups on Capitol Hill by big business? And if we are going to break the hegemony of big business interests, we must unite, not in parties, but around an idea. And we must approach the politicians one by one. And he came up with several examples of how this could be done. And I was reading this morning, in fact, a newsletter from Steinringen, who is a Norwegian sociologue and political scientist, a professor in Oxford at the present. And he was talking about peace and peace work, what we are going to learn more about later. And what he was saying, and he's gathering us around an idea, the links between peace and democracy. And he traced the roots of this discussion back to the 18th century, to Immanuel Kant, who was advocating the idea of perpetual peace, zum ewigen Frieden, where he was saying, Kant was saying, that countries or states which had some democratic control or control by the citizens were less likely to be warring than those which had no such control. And Steinringen is saying that when you look at it, truly democratic states never go to war with each other. Truly democratic states never go to war with each other. He was saying democratic states may fight non-democratic states, but there is this link between democracy and peace. Hence, a more democratic world will be a more peaceful world. So this is an idea, this is your idea. We are going to learn more about it, and I'm thrilled to do that. And I think the work you are doing, we will. I know so little about it that I cannot even refer to it. But this idea of gathering people around the idea of peace and democracy is tremendously important. Now, the last example of how ideas and people working on an idea can change the world is the Me Too campaign, the feminist Me Too campaign. Now, this we all know about the what is happening in the actors world in America, where many female artists have stood up and told about their experiences. And in Iceland, this has been the same. Women in education, in the trade union movement, in politics, in healthcare, all standing up. Now, we may not, all of us, I certainly do not, agree with everything that is being said. I don't. But I recognize this as extremely important. And I recognize this as something changing the world. Because it has not only to do with harassment or violence, it is to do with how people interact and how they are against each other. And so this is doing what? It's changing culture. It is a cultural change, a profound important cultural change we are witnessing in this movement. And in the end, in this rather unorganized speech, I am looking for the quotation by Robin Williams, the actor who died in 2014, I think it was. And he said, "No matter what people tell you, words and ideas can change the world." I agree. Thank you.